Also, hanging off the hopper feeder, there's a suet feeder, which inside of it is a suet cake. Suet is best in the winter because it helps give the birds the fat that they need to survive. And birds that you'll get at suet cakes are woodpeckers, nuthatches, and other birds like that, sometimes starlings as well. This is a tube feeder in which there's a mixed seed. There's occasionally a random patch of black-oak sunflower, which I'm not really sure why that is. But also mixed in is different kinds of millet, red and white, and also cracked corn. And something I found is that birds don't typically like the cracked corn. They mostly just throw it on the ground. So personally, from experience, I would recommend getting mixed without a ton of cracked corn. Here's another type of tube feeder, which is designed specially for goldfinches and other finches. And inside that is thistle seed, or Niger seed, it's called both. And the goldfinches will crave this. Like, before we had our thistle feeder, we just had this one. Occasionally we would get a goldfinch, and it would be very exciting when we did. But since we've had this feeder, they've been just flocking, and we cannot go a day without seeing a goldfinch, which is exciting. Then this is a hummingbird feeder. As you notice, it's red, which red normally attracts hummingbirds. So it's very good to have red on the hummingbird feeder. And you can buy packets of hummingbird mix that you can mix with water and put in the feeder. However, I find it easier to just take sugar water, which is 4 parts sugar and 1 part water. Or no, 4 parts water, 1 part sugar. Then there's field birds. These birds are often the most unpredictable and hard to see and find. Mostly identify and get an easy view. In the background, there's an Upland sandpiper, which is a migrant that occasionally comes through. This was the first time we'd ever seen one anywhere near our area, so we were very excited about it. And this is also probably one of the best pictures you're ever going to see of a field bird, unless you have a very nice camera. So, most of field birds are seen from a vehicle, so I find it a good idea to keep a field guide and binoculars in your car, just so that way if you see some movement or something in a field, you can go ahead and look and see if it's a bird and hopefully identify it. Then there's water birds. Despite its name, water birds do not have to be in this picture where there's ocean. They can just be in little rivers or creeks or any body of water pretty much. Water birds are typically broken down into groups, such as waterfowl, wading birds, shorebirds, aerial water birds, and other birds that are always by water. Waterfowl would be ducks and geese, for the most part. Here we have some ducks and geese. And that's the majority of what waterfowl is. Then there's the wading birds, which is like herons, egrets, flamingos, and birds that actually wade out in the water and stab at fish. Then there's the shorebirds, which are typically the sandpipers and plovers, which we don't get a lot of around here, but those are shorebirds. This is the laughing gull, and this would be part of the aerial water birds because they fly above the water and occasionally go into it, but they mostly stay in flight. Then there's this belted kingfisher. It's the picture is taken through a spotting scope, so that's why there's the black circle around it. But I grouped kingfishers into the other water birds category just because it's always by water and it eats things that are in the water, but it isn't necessarily a water bird. Although it's always by water. Then there's my own birding experience. I started birding about 3.5 years ago, and I give most of the credit to my mom for starting me on bird watching. But I also blame the American goldfinch, because that has been one of my favorite birds for the longest time, simply because it was yellow. My favorite color has always been yellow, not entirely sure why, but it is. So I was just totally pumped that there's a yellow bird coming to our feeder. So every time a goldfinch would show up at our old tube feeder, my mom would call me over and I would come running to see the goldfinch. And from there, I decided I wanted to take a 4-H project called Ohio Birds and that really kick-started everything that got me into birds. This summer, I went to Maine on an island called Hog Island, and it was a camp for teens. It was called Coastal Teen Bird Studies, and it was about a week-long trip where I was stuck on an island, and we just watched birds.